Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's Licensing Committee meeting. I am Councillor Rick Jones, the chairman of this committee. I'm supported today by the vice chairman of the committee, Councillor Phil Barnett, and the other members of the committee, who are Councillors Adrian Abbs, Graham Bridgman, Billy Drummond, Clive Hooker, Tony Linden, David Marsh, Graham Pask and Martha Vickers. Councillor Marsh is joining us via Zoom. The other councillors of the committee are in the chamber. Mr. Sean Murphy, Mrs. Maura Fraser are the officers currently advising the meeting and are all in attendance via Zoom. We're also expecting, I think, Mrs. Julia O'Brien. Mrs. Vicky Yo is in attendance as the clerk to the committee, and the Zoom host is Mr. Stephen Chard. The meeting is being recorded and live streamed on YouTube, so the members of the public are able to follow the proceedings. Before we start the meeting, I would like to explain, for the benefit of members of the public who may be watching, that today's meeting is what we call a hybrid meeting, being held over both Zoom and with councillors present and COVID compliant in the Market Street Council offices on the second floor. Please can I ask everyone present in the meeting to make sure that you have your microphone placed in front of you and ask you to make sure that you speak directly into it. Could I also ask that if you wish to speak, could you use your Zoom hand to indicate that? This area unfortunately has a pillar right in front of me, so I can't necessarily see everybody physically. However, for voting, I'd ask you to raise your physical hands and Mrs. Yarl will actually do the count. If we hear the evacuation alarm this afternoon, we must leave the building immediately, proceeding via the safe emergency exit route, which will be shown to us by trained officers. Please follow any instructions given by those officers. The assembly point is a Newbury Station multi-storey car park. Anyone requiring assistance downstairs will be assisted accordingly by the officers. Do members have any questions about how the meeting will be conducted? No. So item one, apologies. Do we have any apologies for the meeting?
Yes, Chairman. Apologies have been received from Councillors Steve Ardar-Walter and Jeff Beck.
Are there any apologies from anyone on the floor? No. Can we turn to item two then, the minutes of two meetings we have to approve, that of Monday, June the 21st last year, and also the 8th of November in 2021. I'd like to move that the meetings be signed as a correct record. Could I ask for a seconder, please? Thank you. Councillor Pask.
Chairman, I have my hand up.
Councillor Bridgman, you do.
Chairman, two thoughts on the first set of minutes. I'm on page 7 of the electronic pack. Firstly, the fourth paragraph down after the bit in italics, I think it has to read amendments recommendation as proposed by Councillor Bridgman was approved. More to the point, under the review of Hackney carriage tariffs at item 7, second paragraph, I don't think it was in my gift to present a report. I think I might have spoken to the report, but I think this was an officer's report I was speaking to. I certainly wasn't conscious that I was presenting it.
Thank you. We'll make that those changes. Is that everything, Councillor Bridgman?
Those are the ones I spotted, Chairman.
Thank you. I won't encourage you to keep trying. Are there any comments from anybody else on the minutes or the accuracy of the minutes of either meeting? Can I therefore ask for a show of hands that be subject to Councillor Bridgman's amendments, they be approved? Can you do your physical hands so that we can so we can see them. Thank you. Thank you very much indeed.
I'll abstain, Chairman. I wasn't at the meeting.
Thank you.
Point of information, Chairman, I was hoping you were going to do it split because obviously I wasn't present at the second meeting. So it was a show of hands. I was working on the basis of the first meeting and I was going to abstain for the second because I'm not
Fine.
present. Okay.
Thank you. Thank you.
Chairman, may I say that I've been assured by the monitoring officer that you can vote for minutes for a meeting you weren't at. I find that a little surprising, but I just offer that out for general information.
Fine. That's news to me. There we go. Thank you very much, councillors. Just a couple of points of matters arising that I've been informed of. The statement of gambling principles, which we discussed in November, has now been fully agreed by council and published ahead of the January deadline, as we promised. The fees item is on this agenda. We also, although it wasn't minuted, discussed informally it wasn't a formal petition, but it was a resolution by Newbury Town Council to petition us as West Berkshire Council to change our licensing policy to involve requirements on late night venues to ensure the safety and health and safety of their staff when travelling home. There has been a discussion between Mrs. O'Brien and legal and the Newbury Town Council. They've had a response back from them and they are satisfied with that response, or at least they're satisfied to go ahead and discuss that. It may come back, but at the moment it's not, that item is not on the forward plan. Item 3, declarations of interest. Are there any declarations of interest for this agenda? No. Right then, item 4, which is a report from Mrs. Fraser concerning the recent taxi liaison group meeting. Maura, would you like to introduce that, please?
Chairman, just to say that the licensing liaison group met on the 17th of January, and there were 2 substantive matters that they discussed at the meeting. The first was the taxi fees that we went out to consultation with. We discussed those at the November meeting, and there's a paper on that at this meeting, so I don't intend to discuss that any further. The other issue that we discussed at the meeting was tariffs. We've agreed previously that what we will be doing is we will be discussing those with the trade every January and seeing if there's an appetite from them to potentially increase to put forward a proposal rather to discuss the tariffs each year. The trade confirmed that they would like that discussion to take place, and they are suggesting that they'd like to go ahead with a proposal to increase the tariffs in line with CPI. So we will be bringing a paper to the July meeting to that effect. The other thing that we did have on the agenda was just some feedback on the day that we had to for the taxis to be able to come along and drive some of the vehicles. The taxi drivers, the feedback that we had from them was that the presenters were very knowledgeable and they learned quite a lot from them. They were disappointed with the lack of turnout from the trade. But the other thing that they found a little disappointing was the range of vehicles that were bought for them to test drive, because the vehicles that came along weren't actually suitable for using as taxis, but they did find the day useful. And that's really all from the meeting, Chairman.
Thank you very much, Ms. Fraser. Councillor Bridgman, would you like to speak?
Thank you, Chairman. One thing I think we should at least acknowledge, perhaps discuss, arising out of something that isn't on the agenda, and this is the discussion we had regarding tariffs and the thought that there might be a 2-tier tariff, one for, as the note says, one for saloon cars and one for multi-seater vehicles. That was part of the discussion. Part of the trade put forward that. I just think we need to acknowledge that is a debating point, if you like, and when we come forward, having heard from the trade next January, I guess, as to what they would like on CPI and so on and so forth, about potential increase in tariffs, that we should acknowledge that and maybe incorporate that in any discussion paper that we put out to the trade on consultation before we come back and then make decisions as to what we are then going to propose to, I think it's the executive on this one, possibly council, but whichever body ultimately makes the decision.
Yeah, it would be to council eventually. The forward plan for July has this item on it because we agreed that we would bring it forward to the July meeting. And the notes from that Maura has written do reference that two-tier possibility. So I'll ask them to make sure they cover that. Yeah. Are there any other comments on the report? We don't have to vote on this. We only have to note the content. Any other?
Chair?
Sorry, Councillor Marsh, yes.
You may not be able to see me, Chair. Thank you very much.
I can see it, it's all right.
Okay.
I'm just looking at the wrong place.
Just very briefly on what Maura had to say, I hope that the committee won't be discouraged from, and the officers indeed, won't be discouraged from pursuing the issue of greener taxes with the trade. I was disappointed in their reaction. I mean, thank you to Maura and the officers for organising that day. And it's disappointing that not many turned up. And then when we discussed it later, I thought their response was kind of depressingly negative, really. I don't know if people saw, probably not everyone reads The Guardian, but last week, Guardian ran a report about how the progress local authorities are making towards zero carbon, and Nottingham City Council, I know it's a different kind of authority, 50% of the licensed vehicles are ultra low emission vehicles. Now, as we know, in West Berkshire, 0%. So I think that we need to find a way to encourage the trade. And the principal objection they raised, well, what if we have to drive to Yorkshire and back, which occasionally they might have to do. But thinking about it, a big firm, well, the big firms, not the independents, but the big firms, I've been thinking about this ever since the meeting, they book people in. You know, if you get a booking for somebody wanting to go to Yorkshire, you don't put them in an electric vehicle. But if you get a booking for somebody wanting to go to Hungerford and back, you do. And I don't think that argument stands up. And as Councillor Abbs has been persuasively arguing, we need to do everything we can to encourage them by, for example, having high-speed chargers at the taxi ranks and so forth. And I think that we need to keep working away. But I don't think there's anything different intrinsically between taxi drivers in West Berkshire and taxi drivers in the rest of the UK. And if they can get to 50% in some authorities, and we can get to something here, and we just have to keep working away until we can persuade them to take the plunge. And finally, as I always say at this point, there's a business opportunity for someone there, because people will take electric taxis in preference to diesel ones, or at least some people will. So Green supporters, for example, will do it because they want to make their contribution towards moving towards low carbon or zero carbon. And you know, I can't believe that we cannot get this thing rolling. And I just hope that people won't be too discouraged by the response so far, and that we'll have another event and keep beavering away at it. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Marsh. Councillor Abbs.
Oops, sorry. Thank you, Chairman. Yeah, I kind of, Councillor Marsh got in a little bit on some what I was going to say. My reading of the meeting is quite well reflected in the report. I did receive one phone call after the meeting from someone who rang a taxi firm, basically saying, yeah, that we were given a bit of a tough time with the ideas that we were putting forward, and you know, they're not all like that. So Councillor Marsh is correct in that, yeah, it wouldn't be everybody's cup of tea straight away, and I think we can definitely help lead the way. As I've mentioned to you before the meeting started, I'd like to as to look at the Euro 6 as a minimum standard for any taxi, because that's been in place since most vehicles 2015, and that in itself will help with the emissions. So I think what I heard most from that meeting was that the range anxiety still exists. The places where you can charge and the cost of charging still exists. So most of the assumptions that we were working on, that we can have some effect as a council on, they are real concerns, and that we just need to find a way forward. And what that way forward is, we'll debate later on, I think. But I wasn't completely disheartened by the meeting, and it sounded a bit like they said, no, it's not right. But actually, afterwards and as we went on, I did start to hear, well, there are some possibilities. We just got to get the formula right to start to persuade them to move.
Thank you, Councillor Ebbs. Mrs. Fraser.
Chairman, just to say that in addition to the responses that we had on the fees, obviously Councillor Ebbs also brought a motion to the January Council. We're intending to respond to that motion at the July Licensing Committee meeting. And we've already started to have discussions with our colleagues in the environment team about what potentially is possible. And we've been looking at schemes that, there's a scheme in Nottingham, but there are other schemes across the country as well. So we are looking at what is possible and what the needs of the trade are, and what we might be able to use to persuade them to go down a different route.
Thank you. And I'm sure your cat behind you agrees with every word that you said. So, you certainly seem very interested. Right, I see no other hands. As I said, we only need to note this report. So thank you for your comments, and we'll move on to the next item. So item 5, clearly this item also has connotations with the previous subject that we discussed. So happy to take new material. I would ask people not to repeat themselves with the things that we've just discussed, but we don't have, we do. Mrs. O'Brien, would you care to introduce your report, please? You're muted, Julia.
Sorry, I apologise. I think I would know this by now. Right, sorry, I'm trying to swap between the two systems. Forgive me, I've lost my details of the system. Moira has done a lot of work on the fees report. Moira, are you able to get into I can't get back to where I should be to see the report. Apologies.
I'm happy to talk to the paper, and then if Sean or Julia can jump in if there's any technical questions, Chairman. Just to say, we ran the consultation as was agreed. We had 2 responses. Both of them were from members of the public. We had no objections from the trade, which is not true of the certainly when we ran the consultation in Bracknell. So the trade seemed to be relatively happy with the fees that are being proposed. The 2 members of the public that did respond, their concerns were chiefly around introducing some sort of a scheme to reduce or remove payments for electric or hybrid vehicles, and that's really where we were with the consultation, Chairman. The other thing just to say is that one of the other fees that we did agree at the November meeting was the fees for DBS checks, and at that time we agreed that the fees would be at £94. Julia's done some work on this, and she's managed to get the fees reduced. So the fees that will appear at the executive in later this month, in February, sorry, will reflect a fee of £79 rather than the 94 that we agreed at the November meeting.
Okay, thank you. Members, does anyone wish to speak on this item? Councillor Ebbs.
Yeah, it's very easy to repeat oneself, unfortunately, on this item. Suffice us to say, let's all remember we have declared a climate emergency. And the important thing for me is just how difficult it is to persuade someone who isn't yourself something we don't have direct control of to actually make that move. And this is the taxi industry is one of those few bits of transport that aren't our own vans and so on, where we can actually go, you know, we have some levers and therefore we can help persuade them. And as many members of the public take taxis, you know, especially on a weekend or have a good night out or whatever, they get to experience, as soon as those vehicles and they're traveling in those vehicles, they realize that they are electric. It kind of, it's a groundswell effect. And I, you know, so although it might be quite hard for us to do something in this area, the public view of what we do, I think would be quite good. It might well be quite persuasive to a lot of people, even if it's not directly persuasive of every taxi driver. So I'm really quite keen that we do what we can, do something. And the fee is one of the few things we do control. Unfortunately, it isn't a massive amount of revenue for the council. Mm. And of course, we can put limits around it in terms of time frame as well. So we can stop the exposure to the council while doing something positive for the trade, which will hopefully then get a snowball effect rolling for bigger things going forward. So, but I've said all of this in the past in one guise or other. It's exactly what we can agree that I'm interested in. So.
Thank you. Councillor Bridgman.
Chairman, I don't wholly. Thank you. I don't. Oh, we're still getting feedback from somewhere. I managed to. I do apologise. Thank you, Stephen. I managed to unmute myself without realising I had. Apologies. Chairman, I don't fundamentally disagree with the thrust of the argument that we wish to encourage electric and hybrid vehicles onto the ranks. I certainly perceive from those bits of the trade that we heard from in the liaison meeting that there are far greater issues than our fee structure stopping them. And indeed, if we look at the table in the report about the reasoning as to why Hackney Carriage and other drivers aren't moving over to electric, it's very much to do with principally limited range on the vehicles and also the cost of those vehicles in the first place and lack of charging. So I come from the stance where I would prefer to see a straightforward, equal method of charging for the kind of things this report is dealing with, i.e. getting a license to operate, registering a vehicle, making sure the vehicle is safe, all that stuff that goes around the driver and the vehicle as a combination. In order to encourage the trade to move over and further our green desire to move to net zero, to get them to move over to the types of low emission and ultra low emission vehicles, I think we have to have a wider debate in council about, for example, looking at what Oxford have done about subsidising vehicle purchase, look at the range and state of our electric charging. But I would prefer to have a regime which has a level playing field for all of those coming into the trade on this type of fee, the fees we're talking about tonight. So I would go with the officer's recommendation for the increases and decreases and the adjustments that are proposed in the paper without proposing alternatives. But I do think, and I do agree with Councillor Adds and indeed with Councillor Marsh, that we need a wider debate, and I think that is coming, about what we as a district do to encourage this type of vehicle onto our roads. Not simply to encourage taxi drivers onto our roads in this type of vehicle, but encourage this type of vehicle across the piece. And I speak as someone who has both a diesel car and an electric car. So I'm well aware of the difficulties with range with electric. And I think that's something we need to think about. But so I would, when the time comes, be happy to propose or second officer's recommendation at, and I'll look it up for you. I think it's A of the alternatives, but Chairman, that's my view on this paper.
Thank you. Councillor Barnett.
Well, I was listening to some of the earlier comments that was being made in relationship to, obviously, encouragement of the owners or the organisations running the taxi business to consider moving to this particular type of vehicle in relationship to what this authority had to consider some years ago. I remember being around at the time when there was a big issue in relationship to disabled vehicles, and there was different types of disabled vehicles, and some were suitable for certain type of disabled and others weren't, and it actually ironed itself out. Obviously very much support at the time with the Discrimination Act, but also, of course, it ironed itself out because it was the user. The user actually went to the company that actually were able to supply the appropriate vehicle. And Councillor Marsh made a comment about, I think, something similar, that certain people with green-minded views might consider going to a company that have got a vehicle which is an electric vehicle. So I think that will be something else that will need to be considered as well. But in relationship to the motion, which I think you were prepared to put forward, Councillor Bridgman, I'm more than happy to second it, if that's the case.
Chairman, may I therefore, obviously open to other members to debate, but when the time comes, I've found it now, I would propose 515A, and wherever it undoubtedly will appear elsewhere in the report, but that's essentially, so in other words, we propose that the fees consulted on be implemented, or we're recommending to full council, of course, it's not our decision, that the fees consulted on be implemented on the 1st of April without modification.
Thank you. And you prepared a second, Councillor Barnett? You're prepared to second? Okay.
Apologies, sorry, I was hastening it along. Sorry, Councillor Bridgman. Yes,
No.
more than willing to second that. Sorry.
Okay. I see no other hands, but I'd like to make a comment on this as well before we proceed to a vote. I'm personally quite in favour of the idea of incentivising the taxi trade to go greener, if that's possible. And as we've said, the licence fee is one of the levers that we do hold. And as Councillor Bridgman has said, the other, in a sense, lever, or rather facilitator, that we hold is the availability of fast charging points, particularly fast charging points on taxi ranks within the district. My only issue with the comments that were made in the consultation, clearly they were intended for us to try and change this round of fee setting. And I don't believe that is either desirable or possible, partly because I think it's very, very, very late for us to influence the budget to the amounts of money that would be involved. I'm also would like to feel that the hit would not necessarily be on the council budget in future if we could devise a way, or work with Bracknell perhaps, to make this a public protection partnership wide initiative and get it within the PPP budget. So I think, as the officers have said also, there are other aspects to this. We've talked about the two-tier possible effects of changing fees and tariffs. We've talked, they've talked about the requirements for us to detail much more specifically what we want to incentivise and how and so on. And I think that will all take time. So I am generally in favour of this, and we have the opportunity, I think, of discussing it again in July, where we are going to discuss Councillor Abb's motion to council. That motion, I think, will generate the discussion all around this, and that gives us a few months for the officers to do the research necessary to come up with a potential scheme that could be in the next round of fee setting rather than this one. So I would like to also recommend that we take the officers' advice on this occasion and pass the fees as laid out in the report, but also put forward a request that there is some research put behind the motion in July that looks at this and maybe implements something in a future environment when we can time the incentive from the fees with the availability of charging and any other lever like subsidy that Councillor Bridgman mentioned. And I think it's clear that if we did something right now, the trade would be way behind us. And it would make very, very little difference to them because there are lots of other issues that they need to resolve. So, sorry, that was a long and rambling summary, but there we go. So we have a proposal from Councillor Bridgman.
Sorry, Chair, there's a couple of hands gone up since you
sorry,
started speaking.
sorry, yes.
Is that okay?
You're right. I'm staring at people, and as they stare back to me, I want to keep looking at them. So I was answering this. So yes, Councillor Ab, sorry.
Yeah, thank you. And I am not opposed with going with voting in favour of what's being suggested. All I would note is that just keep in mind when we say, well, we're worried about the budget. Simultaneously, the trade's saying actually that one incentive is probably not going to be enough to make us move. So the impact on the budget would probably be exceptionally small this time around. But it would have given a very clear indicator that this is the thinking of the council and that we're willing to help you in some way. So I think the exposure that we would have given to the council is very, very small. If one or two taxis actually went, I would have been ecstatic. But based on the feedback that we saw at the meeting, maybe they wouldn't this time around, in which case it wouldn't have had any effect. And so, if this particular proposal were to fail, then I see a very little harm. We're doing very little harm, in fact, in just saying, well, okay, now we'll implement this kind of scheme that was put forward. And, if what's our worst case budget scenario, it's something like £30,000 or £40,000. From the overall budget of this council, it's nothing. And so we could have done something. But I'm really pleased to hear that we're going to, if we don't do it now, that we're going to do it soon. Because it's that soon bit that we need to give those flags to the public as soon as possible, that we want them to get on with it, really. So.
Thank you. Councillor Pask.
Thank you, Chairman. I wasn't really going to add to the debate because I'm in broad agreement with everybody. One of my favourite expressions, one which I haven't used for some time, is that as a local authority, we can't provide everything, but we can certainly enable much. And I'm wondering whether, in that this is going to be revisited in the future, whether there's much traction in finding perhaps officers seeking the cooperation of those who provide electric vehicles, with obviously recompense with suitable advertising and other incentives. We should be enabling taxi drivers to get good deals, not necessarily providing those good deals ourselves. I think it's food for thought. I think it's worth looking into. We may get a negative response. I doubt very much that we would. I think that there would be companies out there who would take this on board and be cooperative. So I'm throwing that in, not to add to the debate, Chairman, but to hopefully aid further future direction when it comes back to us. Thank you. I am, of course, supportive otherwise of what is proposed.
Thank you, Councillor Pax. That's an interesting idea. Right, councillors, I think we're at the point where we have a proposal, we have a seconder. Can we please vote on this proposal? Can I have a show of hands?
6, 7, 8, 9, 9.
Thank you very much. We move on to the last item of the agenda, which is the forward plan for the licensing committee.
Chairman, may I bring forward the action on the forward plan that
Of course, yes. We can. I'm opening the floor to speaking of any comments or changes to the forward plan that councillors wish to see.
Yeah, I mean, given the way the last debate went, especially, and that we're going to be looking at the electric, we shouldn't forget. Well, one of the other things we heard at the feedback is that they don't all buy brand new vehicles, and so how can we influence there? Well, what we could do is to actually start to set a minimum standard for Euro ratings in emissions from even the fossil fuel cars that remain. And I'm quite happy to go all the way to Euro 6 because, to be honest, since 2015, so that's up to a 7-year-old vehicle, you should have been able to achieve that rating, as long as you don't buy a Volkswagen, of course, or one of the other German models that seem to have fibbed about at the time. But so I'd like to see that on the forward plan, that we look to bring that in to the, we won't accept, if we can say such a thing, we won't accept vehicles that don't meet at least the minimum of the Euro 6 standard going forward.
Thank you. Are there any other comments, Councillor Bridgman?
Yeah.
You've done it again.
I keep doing that. I do apologise, Chairman. You'd think
you should put your hands in your pocket, I think.
You'd think I'd know better by now, wouldn't you? Chairman, two things. Firstly, I apologise to Moira, who sent me a chat, and I managed to only read it after the end of the debate last time round, and she just asked me to point out to members, and indeed point out to the public, that there's been a reduction in the DBS fee in the fees we've just discussed from £94 to £79, which I think is excellent news. Chairman, on the point of the forward plan, the question I had for Julia was, this is the first time, and I've chaired this committee, as you know, that I've seen the sex establishments policy come forward. So it says to review and, if appropriate, amend the policy. I wasn't aware we had a policy to review or amend. Is this actually new? And if it is, which bit of legislation does it come from?
It's not new. It has been around for a little while, and it was the Police and Crime Commissioners Act, I think it was originally came in. So I can't, I think it was before my time, to be honest, Councillor, that the original policy came in. So it does probably need reviewing. Having said that, we don't have any. So it may be something that members don't feel they wish to review at this time.
So we have a policy, we don't have any establishments, is that?
Yes, we do.
Councillor Linden.
Yes, Chair.
Can you put your mic on?
My apologies. Yes, for too much information. Before we became a unitary, I was on the Environment Committee. I don't know if Councillor Pass remembers it as well. We had a very interesting session. We decided to set a fee of, I was also on the Naughty Sex Film Committee as well, actually. I think the last thing we saw was The Last Temptation of Christ, which I voted that it should be on public display, and turned it down. And then this council...
You're right, this is too much information.
It is too much information, Chairman. And yes, we decided on a fee of £5,000. Nobody came forward. We've obviously had them in Reading. I've never been into those establishments there, but so yes, we do have these fees, and nobody's taken it up. I think we do have an Ann Summers shops or something, don't we? Sorry, we did. So so yeah, it's still relevant. You know, somebody might decide they want to come into Newbury or Thatcham or Pangbourne or whatever. So I think it's relevant we have it, but yeah, we have a policy on it, and it started with pre-unitary and also on the films which we deregulated to look at on West Berkshire Council when we became unitary. Thanks, Jim.
Thank you. Councillor Pask.
Well, all I was going to say, I do remember this coming in, as Councillor Linden alluded. I know nothing about Ann Summers shops, Chairman, but we were told at the time, and I don't see what's changed, that we have to have this fee there, as Councillor Linden said, just in case someone wished to open such a shop, such an establishment. It's never happened here, but who knows?
Well, the item is tabled for about 18 months away, so I guess we have time to think about it before then. So. Okay. Just coming back on Councillor Abb's suggestion, I'm very happy to add that to the forward plan. perhaps for July. But I think we need to request more public protection officers just to investigate whether we have the actually have the ability to require that. Could you ask them to investigate that? I would ask Councillor Abbs to write formally to you with his suggestions so that you have the text that you can work from. Is that okay?
Happy to, Chairman.
Councillor Barnett.
Well, we've actually we moved on a bit, but all I was going to say for members that might have been around when I was around years ago, we did actually have an application for a sex establishment in Cheap Street, but it never materialised. I remember being interviewed by Radio Oxford at the time and being asked what I felt on it, and obviously all my view is that, well, we would discuss it when it came forward at the appropriate time, and left it at that.
Sorry, I went on too fast. Mr. Fraser.
So, Chairman, that we are bringing the draft Hackney carriage and private hire policy to the next meeting, and the proposal that Councillor Abbs has made could probably be incorporated into that discussion. I think that's what Julia was going to say as well.
Okay, that's great. That's good. Great, thank you very much. If there are no other suggestions or comments, I'll close that item. As it's the last item on the agenda, I will close the meeting. Thank you very much for your contributions and your attendance.